building and being part of scaling and growing a company, I think, is a really important part of venture or being a venture partner.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Careers in Finance. Today, I am joined by a wonderful friend of mine, Denisia, and I am so happy to be able to interview a successful woman in finance. And I just want to open it up, I guess, just by asking, where did you get your interest in finance? How did you get started? Did you have a parent that was working in finance? Where did your career and interest in finance begin? Because I know that you are also something very rare, a female engineer.
Indeed. Yeah, so it's kind of funny. Both my parents were in finance. My mom kind of dabbled in it, but my dad was always an accountant. But that was not an option being Indian kids. It was either doctor, engineer, or lawyer. Those were the three options. And my family was in aviation. And that got me interested in it as well. I always wanted to be a pilot, but then sort of feared, like I went and sort of went and worked with my uncle for a bit. And he took me up in the helicopter and everything. And I was like, okay, I'm actually scared of heights. So I don't think this is going to work. And so thought of different careers in the aviation space. And then finally agreed with my parents and said, okay, we'll go the engineering route. So we moved to Canada so I could study aviation or aerospace engineering at Carleton and did that. But while doing that, I took some business courses, even though I couldn't get credited for it. And was really interested in it, super interested in it. And one of a close friend of mine, I met his father, and he's a serial entrepreneur. And I was sitting down and having this like intense conversation with him. I was like, wow, this is super interesting. It's like a whole different world that I've never been introduced to. And I was like, should I switch out of engineering? A lot of my friends were doing that at this point. It was like third or fourth year of engineering, so very close to being done. And I was like, should I just keep going or should I switch out? Because they wouldn't allow us to do a co-degree, like business as well as
You couldn't do
engineering.
the dual major thing?
No, I guess it was either it wasn't an option then or it was too late. I can't remember. But so I couldn't do it. And so decided since I've already invested so much in it, let's just finish it and complete it. And so I, completed my engineering and then got recruited into a software company. So, decided let's do that and went and worked there for a while. Started on the R&D side. It was super interesting. They were moving from an on-premise platform to a web platform. And so I helped out with the whole like product management responsibility, and sort of, learning about the user interface and, what the customer wanted and stuff like that, and sort of building out the pages and stuff like that. So it was super interesting. And then once I was built out, I'd sort of transition into the technical sales side of it because no one knew what the platform now did because it was a completely different platform. And so I helped out the sales team and then slowly kind of transitioned into the business side of the company and loved it. I just really, really enjoyed it. And it was like, okay, you know what? I should go back to sort of the business finance side of it. The finance was not sort of top of mind at that point, but the business was. And then decided I quit my job, took a year off. And during that year off, I was like, should I just do a volunteer thing overseas, do something completely different? And went to Spain. Went to a Spanish speaking country because I wanted to learn Spanish and went to Honduras. And there, it was, the International Development Agency at the time, when it existed. They used to have internship opportunities across the world. And this was with a microfinance organization, and they were looking to set up a microfinance program in Honduras with a partner organization. And so, they wanted me to lead that. And so I went there, did it, and realized.
What is, for those that aren't familiar that are listening, what is microfinance?
So this specific, there's different programs. So it could be, you're lending, providing small loans to, small, medium-sized businesses. And that's primarily sort of the definition of it, but it comes in different sort of program styles, if you will. And we were sort of building out. Um, uh, how do you word it? Like, we're building out sort of an add-on to a program that already existed for people with disabilities. There was an education platform to teach them new skills. And so this microfinance program would be layered on to sort of give them the financial capabilities to then sort of execute or on their, the business that they're trying to start up. And so it was a bit unique in that sense. But then as I was sort of trying to implement that, I realized I didn't have, the background in finance. And, I was sort of part of having the microfinance piece was also that they learned about finance, right? And like putting together a ledger and all these things to help with the accounting of the business, right? But obviously in an informal way, but still be able to manage cash flow and things like that. And I was like, well, I don't have the fundamentals. How am I going to teach them the fundamentals? So put together a program to teach the participants. And so yeah, so the whole experience was great. It was a great learning experience, but realized there was a lot of gap in my knowledge and skill set as well. And so I decided to come back to Canada and do an MBA. So that would give me an opportunity to learn the finance piece, the business piece, and all of it. So I did that.
By this
And
time, were you fluent in Spanish?
I was, yeah. And so, well, I was getting there. So I came back and started at Schulich, and part of the reason I selected Schulich was because it had the international MBA program. And with that, you can pick a specialization, area of specialization. And so I picked Latin America. And you also get Spanish classes along with that, right? And so you can perfect your Spanish as well. While I was doing the business degree as well. So it was a good way. And then I was still, so that's when I met my now husband. And so I was moving back and forth to Honduras. And so it was, great. I could still practice it was not just learning it.
Parts of your life coming together in that
Yeah,
chapter.
exactly. And so I was still practicing it, which is, I think, very important of getting fluent in any language, right? And so yeah, so I did that, and then it was by this time, my now husband was in Canada already. He immigrated here, and so it was like, okay, what's the next chapter now? Do we all move back? I mean, he already moved to Canada, so might as well find something here. And that's when I got introduced to someone at BDC, and they were like, "Oh, you've got a great technical background, you've got a business background. We're trying to." Provide loans to technical businesses. But we're not able, but we have to still figure out a strategy and how we're going to sort of provide the lending, because most of the software companies don't have assets to lend against, right? So how do we do that from an underwriting perspective and stuff like that? And, are you able to sort of help us with that, developing that strategy and what that execution model looks like? So came in, did that for a while. It was going really well. They put together a team similar to now how you find a TD and BMO and so on, just focused on tech companies. We did that at BDC as well, and then saw, okay, this is interesting, but I really want a bit more challenge. I'm not using my technical skills at all. And also on the business side as well, because it was a lot of just onboarding new companies to sign up to sort of the lending side.
And this
Um,
role was mainly just focused on the credit piece, right?
it was just focused on that. So I was not even doing any due diligence or anything, right? So we would just kind of gather all the documentation and send it to the credit team. So there was, I was not finding it as challenging. And so through BDC, was offered they call it like a stage, so an internal kind of internship with another department, and was able to work with the BDC IT Venture Fund, and loved it because I was able to use sort of the technical background as well as the finance, business, and so on.
At this point, are you drawing on anything aerospace?
Besides just sort of understanding, I think, in venture, you have to sort of be able to uh, pick up or understand the technology really quickly, right? Because
Mhm.
it's evolving so fast, and now you see that with AI, is just be able to sort of research and learn and be able to pick up on sort of what are the trends, what is sort of makes this company excel, in terms of their IP and stuff compared to other companies providing the same sort of offering. And so I think, the engineering side definitely helps with that.
Yeah, the piece where it's so my husband's an engineer and he did his master's in mechanical engineering, so something a little bit different. But
Mhm.
the I think the spirit of every engineer is that they love problem solving.
Exactly.
And the
Mhm.
thing with men, especially male engineers, their big thing is they all say this, which is I love Lego. It's like building things and like that's like a huge part of their childhood.
Yeah.
But I find that anyone that comes from an engineering background has a tendency to do really well in finance because they're always focused on
Mm.
finding solutions just in a different setting than you would in, for example, aerospace engineering.
Mhm, mhm. And yeah, it could be true. I mean, I'm glad to hear that I never got into Lego,
Neither did I.
but yeah, but my daughter is, so I'm glad to hear that. She loves it. She goes through Lego sets like crazy. So I'm glad to hear that. I'm hoping she gets into even though I see a lot of more male kids in the engineering classes, than females. I'm hoping she gets into the technical side as well. But anyways, sorry, what do you?
Yeah. And then so after the venture fund, you've started at BDC in mainly a credit capacity, and then you've kind of grown internally at BDC.
Mhm.
First, you started at the IT venture fund, and tell us what your day to day was like in that, because I know so many people um, are becoming more and more interested in being at a venture cap company. So like I think so. I'm not going to date myself and say when I graduated, but in the early 2010s, I would say,
Yeah.
he, the whole, like, I think this still exists today, but it's like, oh, I want to go to an investment bank. I want to be part of the investment banking analyst team. Like, that was the number one path. It was that you either pick that you want to be an investment banking analyst or you go into capital markets and you go to sales and trading. And then there's like general buy side. And for me, being in Toronto, place that I ended up initially was Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, there's CPPIB, but venture like VC was not really a piece that people talked about back then.
Right.
It was still kind of like relatively unknown. But I think as you know, especially in the US, like Sequoia and all of those places start to come up, people become more and more interested in that path. So I'm wondering, maybe you could share what was it like when you first started, like the day to day, so to speak, for the IT venture fund, and then take us through how you grew in BDC and where you are now, because you're still in the VC space.
I am, yeah. So when I first started out, and it sort of progressed throughout my career at BDC, I mainly sort of focused on the due diligence side of things. So stayed on the investment side. And so mainly due diligence, you'd be introduced to a company, you'd look at all the data that they provided, the data room, look at the pitch deck, look at all the financials, projections, statements, so on. So the IT Venture Fund focused on sort of Series A and above. so a bit more later stage. And I'm saying later stage because right now I'm focused on very early stage companies. And so you had a lot of data, them selling to customers and so on, and so you could do cohort analysis, and determine, see how they're doing in terms of growth of new customers, as well as in terms of retaining existing, right? So you do that in-depth analysis, and figure out if this is sort of a right company. And that's just on the financial side. But then you also look at the technical side, as I mentioned before, and sort of understand the technology, understand the IP, and especially with software companies, IP, is really tricky. Deep tech, all these other sort of type hardware type companies, there is sort of tangible IP there, but with software, it's very, it's different. And so really understanding sort of how the company can defend itself, and excel in terms of product offering and so on, to stay sort of at the lead in its space, right? So like all of this, you kind of have to put together this analysis, put together an investment memo, and then sort of pitch to the rest of the team for the initial or follow-on investment. And so that sort of would be the day-to-day, when I was working at the BDC IT venture fund. And then, as I sort of grew, so I started out as an analyst, and then sort of grew into that role as senior analyst, and then associate, and through sort of while during my career, sorry, at BDC. And then you just kind of take on more responsibilities, but I always still focus on the due diligence side of things, but take on more responsibilities like sourcing the companies, working on the term sheets, putting together the term sheets, negotiations, to take on more responsibility on the legal side. So working with the legal team, making sure that we've got all the different aspects of the term sheets in the legals. You're always looking to protect the fund from a downside perspective, because most of generally you're always looking at the upside, but you have to also protect the fund on the downside. Like, what if the company doesn't do as well? How do we protect our securities moving forward, as the company fundraises and they onboarding new investors and so on. And so there's a lot of sort of these different variables, that is really interesting when you're putting together the term sheet. And so as you're sort of growing in your career, you take on sort of more responsibilities, work closely with the partners, sort of from the start to the end, close of a deal, and then also on portfolio support and management. And that's also a very critical piece. And I saw that as I was sort of growing in my career as well. The portfolio support is a big piece as well. It's not just sort of the due diligence and figuring out if this is a strong company, but the due diligence provides sort of the gaps of where the company needs to focus so that to excel and grow. And then the portfolio support and management piece is really important to help with sort of getting them to that next milestone, right? So if that piece is missing, then especially if you're a lead investor, if that piece is missing, then the company just doesn't know what to do to get to the next stage, right? And so that's sort of why I really like sort of the fund that I'm with today, is because they've got a platform piece, they've got the finance, they've got the HR piece, they've got a network of advisors that they bring on board, as the company's looking at the go-to-market, or looking at all the different aspects, and so. And I think also just being in a niche space. So the current fund that I'm at is called TopDown Ventures, and we invest in early stage software companies that sell to or through the managed service provider channel. And so it's very niche, right? And so, the three founders, they've started their own businesses, well-known businesses. They've taken it to IPO, being acquired from by Tesla, Kaseya, and so on. And so they really know how what it takes to sell to the MSP space, and what go-to-market strategies really work. And so they started investing with their own capital from all the success they've made. From their exits, they started to invest with their own capital, and then again saw success there, and now they've launched the venture fund, and I've come on board to sort of help with basic, all the operations pieces, fundraising, and so on. And so I think this is sort of now the next step of my career, where it's having ownership in a fund, building out sort of all the different aspects of the fund, and then sort of looking at even our second fund right now. And so it's another part of sort of being in venture capital, where
As you grow in your career, though, your role changes so much. Like in the beginning, a lot of people I think really enjoy the due diligence piece, the research, getting to know the different companies. But then as you grow, a lot of it becomes I don't want to say like sales role, but it kind of is in that like all of a sudden you're having to go and like see what companies are out there. You're having to build relationships and then see what the next one to invest in is. What is your favorite part of your role today versus what was your favorite part of your role when you started in venture?
So when I started in venture, it was the due diligence piece, really getting to know the company, really seeing sort of the different variables that kind of make this company a success, right? And like getting into the depth of the sort of analysis, and then it sort of moved into term sheet creation and negotiation, and sort of really thinking of all the playing out forward. So like what is it going to take to get from here to exit, and how do we protect the fund and ensure sort of that we maximize our returns. So that was sort of the next really interesting part, and I really enjoyed. And then now I find it's just the sort of the different aspects of really running a venture fund, right? So with BDC, we didn't have to fundraise because BDC was our LP. Now, being in fundraising, there's so many different aspects. So you have to think about marketing. You have to think about sort of, all the back end operations of the fund. You have to think about the financials. You have to think about, I don't know if I mentioned fundraising, but fundraising, which is a huge, big deal. But then
Fundraising is very stressful.
And then also, just building out your network, right, of family offices, institutional investors, which I never had to do before. And then the data room side, all the documents that we require. And so there's just so many different aspects to a venture fund that I'm learning now. And it's really exciting, and it keeps me going.
So, Denisia, I have one last question for you, which is if you could give young Denisia a piece of advice after when you were joining BDC, what would it be? What is the one piece of advice that you could give all of our listeners who aspire to be in your shoes?
Um, The one piece of advice I'd give is, I guess, to be open to opportunities. Many young professionals that have come into the sort of the venture space, I find, which is great, but are very ambitious, and sort of they have that end goal of being a partner. But in venture, which is very different from other sort of PE type roles, building and being part of actually scaling and growing a company, I think, is a really important part of venture, or being a venture partner. Just because, like, if you have to be on the board, you will be guiding companies, you will be looking at sort of what that exit look like. You will be trying to work with the company to get to that exit stage, right? Because I mean, we've got 5 to 7 years, and we have to get these companies to return the capital. And so, having that experience is great. And if you're sort of sticking in finance, it's hard to sort of gain that experience, that operational experience. but there are opportunities while you're at the fund to take up projects here and there that will sort of work, that allows you to work with the company directly on a specific project. Say for example they're looking for a line of credit. You can work with them to sort of work with different institutions to find sort of the best offering, and sort of help them understand what those offerings are and sort of why this term sheet is better than the next, right? So that's just one example. And so taking up sort of opportunities like that will give sort of that operational experience. But I think at the end of the day, if you want to be a partner, you will still have to sort of consider going back and gaining that experience as well. Because then you're able to, like I said, not only provide advice at the board level, but also be able to communicate using the same sort of terminology that a founder would understand, or show that you've been in those shoes, right? So that you can sort of relate to them easily. But yeah, so that's what I would say is sort of my advice to someone that wants to get into venture capital.
And what is your goal for the next kind of 3 to 5 years of your career, you think?
Yeah, so I think, well, I just started this new role with TopDown Ventures, and this is just the first fund. Like I mentioned before, it's only 40 million, and I think our goal is sort of to raise a larger fund, say 250 for our second fund. So definitely, the goal is helping on the fundraising side, taking up more leadership roles on the operations and so on, and getting us ready for being able to sort of raise that second fund, third fund, so on, and hopefully gaining more ownership in the fund as well, as an investor, and in terms of carry, but also in terms of maybe even in terms of promotions and so on.
And
Mm-hmm.
so, I think that this has been our most informative, educational, and like very easy to follow linear podcast we've had so far. And I know a lot of our CFI members have really deep interest in pursuing a career in venture. So I hope that whoever is listening, especially if you are one of the female listeners and that you're looking for a career path in venture, I hope you've been able to see yourself in Indonesia to a degree, and that if you are interested in a career path in VC, I hope that this has been helpful. And until next time, we'll see you all later.
Thanks for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. FinPod is brought to you by Corporate Finance Institute, the #1 rated online provider of finance and banking training, certifications, and productivity tools.